So a thing happened last week, which I think acts as a really good way for us to have this conversation. So today around getting defensive. I was in the car and having a long conversation with somebody who I work with on a voluntary basis. So the first thing I would just want to say is that this conversation was a positive one. I want to start with that, a positive one that landed really well. But for context, life is very stretched at the moment. I think I've made that quite clear on the podcast. My husband's overseas. There's a lot going on with family and other situations, and it's a really stretching time. And I am probably at the moment like keeping my head above water rather than thriving in all ways. I'm doing all right, so don't worry, but I am definitely not like this is the season to be jolly. So this conversation, we were talking about some of my responsibilities, and I had chaired a recent meeting, for this person. And he said to me, as we were talking, I'd been discussing about, how much I'm involved and so on and so forth. And we got onto the subject of that recent meeting in and of itself. And he said to me, to be honest, it was a bit all over the place, Hannah. And we ended up having a conversation about that, and we ended up talking about it, and I'll come back to where the conversation went, but it was an example of feedback about improvement-based feedback that had the potential to cause me to get really defensive. Like when he said, well, it was a bit all over the place, Hannah, I probably wasn't expecting that, and I could feel myself responding. So today's episode is all about this. How do we deal with feedback around improvement? We're not talking about awful criticism that's not helpful. We're talking about constructive feedback about growing. And how do we do that in a way that doesn't mean we get massively defensive? So what do you think about getting like critical feedback? Let's call it critical feedback or development feedback. Okay, we're talking about this as reasonably positive critical feedback. What do you think about it?
I think there's a way to do it. I've been taught the sandwich model about compliment or praise.
Yeah.
Could be better, praise at the end.
Yeah.
And it's silly, but I think it's a really good model to make sure that you're delivering feedback in a way that's kind, in a way that's not fluffing things up, but actually is helpful. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, as a person, in terms of me on the receiving end, I probably don't love it. I think, but that speaks of me, right? That's something that I think speaks of me, my personality. I definitely don't wade into tell me how I can do better. And I see that as something that I'm growing in rather than that's a good thing. There are some people who love development feedback. Now, in terms of how it's delivered and how people do it, there is a whole conversation around that, which I think we can have next week. So I reckon we should talk next week about how do we give it? How do we do development feedback? How do we not shy away from it? How do we not deliver it in a way that's bruising? Looking at ways that we can make sure we get that right. But on the receiving end, I don't think that I love it. There are times when I handle it better than others. But like going back to that situation and going back to my story, I was aware that in that moment when he said to me, it was a bit all over the place, Hannah, I could feel myself responding to that. And I had the potential in that moment to begin to defend myself. So, or all the reasons why that wasn't true, or all the reasons why that wasn't fair, or all the reasons why I don't want to hear this right now, or just a whole load of emotion. And I think if you're listening to this and you know you don't love development feedback, I think the first thing we should talk about, so point number one, is we need to understand the triggers. So we are triggered when we're given development feedback in some way. You could be triggered positively towards growth, but there's a whole load of other triggers, not so positive, that I think we should talk about what those are. So the first set of triggers are external factors. So things that are not about you. These are the easy ones, which I think we can talk about a bit more next week. But like poor delivery. So we could be triggered because somebody says something to us that lands in a way that's a bit ouch or a bit bruising or a bit blunt, lacking nuance or lacking context. And I think we can talk about that poor delivery a bit more next week. And I think there's a legitimate reason why we might react to that. There are some other reasons why we might react. It could be that it's unclear or vague, and it's just like this woolly thing that we don't understand. It could be that we feel that person has a bias or a personal agenda that's leading their feedback, a whole load of reasons why they're saying it that feel less than transparent, let's put it that way. Or it could be that there's an overload of criticism. So like you said, we're not getting the praise, we're only getting the criticism, and it's not being surrounded by other feedback. That can mean that external factor, because the kind of climate is such that it's just this should be better, this should be better, this should be better. That can affect the way we respond. Now, if we put external factors to the side for a little bit and recognize that there is a way to do development feedback well and not well, and that we'll come back to that next time, I want us to think about those internal factors that are about us. So assuming that it's reasonably well delivered, not perfect, but reasonably well delivered, we can still have a sense of reaction to that.
What, in that situation that you shared,
what was I thinking?
What triggered you?
Yeah, just a very good point. The good news is I knew I could feel a trigger. So that is growth, right? So I knew I was feeling it. So there's a few things. There was a simple fact of the fact that I'm tired and stretched. So there was a simple fact that it was landing on me when I already don't have a lot left. So if you're feeling like you're at the margin and something should be better, how does that make you feel? If you're already feeling like I'm not doing my jobs well enough and someone says, no, actually you didn't, that doesn't feel great. Yeah. And I probably have a bit of a values around myself that I try to, to serve others well and do my best. So it was landing on you're just confirming my suspicions. That doesn't mean it wasn't true or fair, but it was landing in a context of me feeling like, gosh, I'm really quite stretched at the moment, and you're just validating what I already feel, which is I'm not doing well enough. So it probably, I think what I noticed about that situation and about myself is that rather than hearing it was a bit all over the place, I kind of had the potential to hear you're a bit all over the place. Or if somebody said to you, it was a bit rushed, you hear it as you are rushed. It was a bit disorganized. You are disorganized. It was a bit insensitive. You are an insensitive person. So what can happen if we're not careful when we're receiving this kind of feedback is it turns into like an identity statement rather than a moment in time. Yeah. And some of us are more prone to that than others.
Sure.
And I think I probably am, especially if there's other factors.
Yeah.
And I guess all of us listening to this podcast or even just going about their lives, on any given day, we're either having a day where we've got the capacity for stuff like this and days when we maybe haven't so much. If life's feeling pretty good or you're feeling pretty secure, maybe we handle it better than the days when we're already underperforming.
And I love how you said, actually, you noticed there was a trigger, because there's a self-awareness piece to know that actually getting criticism is not always bad, and we can't always bulldoze into like defense mode.
No.
But actually you say like, I felt something rise in me, and you acknowledge that, and that then informs how you respond, right?
Yeah, and I need to be like clear with people listening that I am a responsive person and I am an emotional person. And so for some people where that could turn into shutdown mode, I am more of the other. I come from a family of more of the other. By family, I don't mean my husband, I mean my origin family. Apart from my mom, the rest of us are definitely me, brother, sister, dad. We're definitely more, we head towards, we go with the thing. And I think what I am hopefully learning is when that's happening, I need to become aware of it happening and make a decision. I want to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. That trigger, in fact, let's do it now. That trigger is a part of our being, which Steve Peters calls the chimp, if you've read his book, The Chimp Paradox. But it's that amygdala part of our being, our brain, which is reactive, responsive, fight, flight, emotion, anger, sadness, fear, whatever it is, that is activated. So when someone challenges us or says something about how we could do better, you could have a chimp response that actually means you go within yourself and you let that person say it, you let it land in your heart and mind, and you own it, and you crumble a little bit. Or you could have a chimp response that defends and says, whoa, hold on a minute. Let me tell you all the reasons why that isn't true. And I'm telling you now, I should have been a barrister because I can argue for England. So within me, defensiveness comes with, I can articulate myself out of this situation, and I'm going to tell you all the reasons why it's not true. Now, the interesting thing is, in most situations that aren't toxic, there's probably truth somewhere in between. So understanding that you have a part of your body, which, let's call it the chimp for the sake of following the example in the Chimp Paradox book, there is a part of you that is reacting because of the personality you have and the experiences that you have had. And they are part of who you are, and they impact what we do when we're given criticism or development feedback. And we need to know and understand that so that we can sort of look at that chimp and think, right, what am I going to do right now? So what Steve Peters talks about is that around that first 2 minutes that we are reacting is a little bit out of our control. By that he means we are going to react. Humans react to something that makes us feel challenged or unsafe. We either react with fight, flight, or all the other options that are out there. But we do not have the right to then just go with that and ride roughshod over rational thinking or good responses. He kind of puts this 2-minute window on it to say, this is your body reacting, this is your mind reacting, this is your soul reacting, your spirit, whatever, your heart. Now you have to make a choice. It's not very long, 2 minutes, but it kind of gives you a window. Yeah. We've had this conversation before as parents. You know, as parents, if something's difficult with a teenager and you feel yourself switching into, right, I'm now triggered and responding, it's really helpful if we let the other person say to us, go and have a minute. But of course, we don't want to hear go and have a minute at that moment. We're like, no, I don't need a minute. Let me say what I want to say. Now, the wisdom comes when someone says go and take a minute, or you say to yourself, I need to take a minute, that we take a minute.
Yeah.
What do you do when you're in that? Because, you're a different personality to me. If you feel that you've had a criticism or something that's triggered you, even if, let's, for argument's sake, doesn't matter if it was reasonable or not, what do you tend to do?
Do you know, I think it's depending on who's giving it. If it's someone that I feel safe with and trust, I probably will lean more towards defense mode.
Yeah.
And if it's someone who I don't trust and don't know very well, it will probably be freeze and deal with the emotions afterwards.
Yeah.
So I think it's a bit of a scale with me.
No, that's true.
But I was going to ask, so we have our natural responses. Does that mean they're right? Like, if that's what we naturally lean towards and our experiences form those things, are they right?
I don't know whether it's about right or wrong, because I would say some of mine aren't helpful, but they probably won't ever completely go away. So I know, for example, that some of what triggers me is a desperate desire to never underperform for people, and fear of rejection, which there's loads of reasons why, I know some of those reasons why I'm like that. Different situational factors, the way I've sort of experienced criticism in life gone by. And I don't imagine that will ever not be part of my response, but that I can learn to shorten the time between what I think that's saying about me to what is the truth. And there are loads of other things that help me, if you're listening to this and you know me or don't know me, I have a personal faith. And so that is another thing that helps me handle those moments. But also this actual understanding of my chimp is really helpful for me to go, Hannah, you're feeling something. It's normal for you to feel this. Now, what are we going to do? And I think if you're listening to this, I think understanding what that internal factor is that's driving is massively important. It doesn't mean that by knowing it, you're then never going to feel it again, but you can name it and you can separate yourself from it a little bit and speak truth to it. So for some people, it's that fear of failure or insecurity. They just don't want to fail. They're driven by a deep desire to get their security by having, done everything well. Some people, it's driven by perfectionism. Obviously, they're not perfect if they're getting feedback that tells them they're not. And perhaps they're somebody who has done so much right in earlier years that they're not used to development feedback because things came easy. Perhaps it's this ego identity piece as well. I think if it's a developmental feedback around something that you hold almost in a place of identity. So let's say you're a singer-songwriter and somebody says, whether it's a stranger on the internet or somebody that you look up to, and they say, oh, their songs are so samey, there's no soul. Now, if you are a singer-songwriter and that's what you sort of see as your thing, that can really bruise you on an identity level. If you are, let's take an example, if you are somebody in a completely different setting, if you're a leader and you're somebody who's a leader of people and you're in the workplace and you sort of pride yourself in being a leader, and someone says, you just don't treat me like a human being, or you don't treat me as an individual, it can cut at your identity, because we begin to take these things and these roles that we play as our identity when they're not our identity.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about how you talked about shortening the gap between feeling defense rise and responding, or the fight or flight thing. What are some practical things to help that shorten the time gap?
Yeah. So one of the things that we need to learn to do is to be present with what's going on. And I think I have for many years fought the fact that I'm an emotional person. And instead of fighting it now, I'm starting to think, okay, this is happening. And I'm trying to almost look at myself from a helicopter position, literally like looking down on the situation in that moment and thinking, what is going on for you? What is going on for Hannah? And taking the moment to do that. Sometimes in situations where I need it, you might actually say, I literally need to take a moment and go and take one. Go into the toilet. If it's an intense work conversation, just saying, I'm going to be back in a minute. Go and actually gather yourself and go to the toilet. Give yourself a moment, look at yourself in the mirror and take those couple of minutes and return. Sometimes it might be a case of actually saying, I'm just going to need 10 minutes or so. It's not about you. You can even say that. It's not about you. I just need a moment. We'll come back. Can we come back to this? Or actually getting to the point when like I was in that situation, where I was able to start to speak some truth into the situation. And one of the things that I started to say to myself was, do not listen to defend, Hannah. Listen to listen. Do not listen to defend. Listen to listen. And I think doing that was really helpful. The other thing was to thinking to myself, this human on the other end of the phone, I know they care about me. And I reminded myself of that. Regardless of anything else, do they care about me? Do they have a hidden agenda? No. Do they want to see me fail? No. So I spoke a bit of truth about who the person was. I mean, as a parent, I sometimes say to my children when I'm giving them developmental feedback, I'm literally so invested in you. I want nothing but the best for you. I have no hidden agenda other than a desire to see you grow. So if they can misinterpret it with the person who loves them more than anybody in the whole world, no wonder we misinterpret it with other human beings in our life. No wonder we do. So I think if you can just pause and build in a pause and evaluate the trigger, I think that's what I encourage you to do is what is going on? Is it an external factor that's triggering you, i.e., have they been a bit rude or have they been critical? Or is it an internal factor that's triggering you? I'm already feeling insecure in this and you are absolutely sort of rubber stamping my insecurity with what you're saying. And doing that is going to help you, but almost step into the third person with yourself a little bit. And then, this is a really important part, we then choose how we respond. So what Professor Steve Peters talks about, we might want to do a whole episode on this at some point in a more general sense. He talks about we cannot excuse ourselves for how we respond from that initial reaction that may not have been a choice. And it's an accountability for what I choose to do. So if I'd have said to this guy, well, it wasn't all over the place, and do you know how much I'm carrying at the moment? And I did a really great job, and actually we did X, Y, Z, and defense. That was a choice for me to make. And I often make that choice. I do want to make that clear to people listening that I am not the paragon of stopping and making a choice here. Anyone who knows me well will say. But there are some questions we can ask ourselves, and I kind of want to leave us with these to think about. In that moment, or even in your reflective process afterwards, ask yourself, is this constructive? So that's the first thing, that's the external factors. Or is there something in this that is constructive? And honestly, there was a conversation that came off the back of that comment with an example that was constructive. Something that I dropped into the agenda, which wasn't on the agenda. And actually, it probably wasn't fair that I did that. So that was constructive. Is there truth in it? So that's kind of attached to that. There was some truth in it. My perspective might have been a bit different, but there probably was some truth in it, truth be told. So is there some truth in it? That's so important. Even if the perspective they're bringing is way over here, there might be an element of truth in it that we need to hear. Doesn't mean there's always truth in it. But is there some truth in it? Ask the question, evaluate, get some help. And the third bit is, how can I use this to improve? That's the thing. So off the back of that conversation, I had a think and I thought, right, there's an aspect of that which I definitely think is true about the addition, to the agenda. And I'm going to do something about that. So I got in touch with the other people that were there. I said, I'm sorry for adding that on. It wasn't very helpful. I didn't give you time to think about it. Let's revisit this at another time. No big deal. No big deal. I didn't die of shame. I haven't been thrown off. But I did think, you know what, that's fair. I can do something about it. And I think not getting covered in shame when someone gives us development feedback is the thing that we need to work on, and to be kind to ourselves and think, even though I'm feeling an emotion of shame or I'm feeling an emotion of lack or fear or anger or whatever it is that it comes out as, often underneath anger or fear is something much deeper around what it's speaking as to who we are. And if we can learn to understand that, these moments of criticism we don't take to heart. And, just to quickly say, sometimes it's really big pieces of critical feedback that we get around something that's really big. But sometimes we're just being given development feedback on less important things. And we can be just as triggered by those, especially when we're not in the right place, because we're seeing it as, you are saying I'm not good enough rather than this could be better. And as cheesy as those whole you are good enough statements are, you are good enough. You as a human being, you are. That doesn't mean we can't grow. And I'm really learning that at the ripe old age of 45, that when people want to give me that kind of feedback, it doesn't say anything about the core of who I am. It doesn't say anything about my identity. It's much more about the things that I can grow in. So to kind of, in a nutshell, understand the trigger, understand why you're reacting like you are, take a pause, evaluate it and go through that. Is it constructive? Is it truthful? Is there truth in it? Can I improve? Make a choice how you're going to respond. Go and reflect with someone, or like we just have, or write it down, or do something to reflect on the process, and go again.